our great superstar moderator, all the way from East Texas and Rhode Island, Llewellyn King.
Thank you, I think, Andres. Would the panel come up, please? We are somewhat in the dark here on the table, which is very unusual for a journalist, because normally they don't trust us in the dark. Smart cities are on everybody's lips, but they don't mean the same thing to everyone. And there's a certain new urgency come into it, not only with the speed of change, the speed of technological change, but also, alas, the speed of climate change, which is going to put new pressures on cities, new ways of communicating, and new ways of moving around. So smart cities go from being an academic concept to a very real one, and one that is going to affect each and every one of us going forward. There is no way of escaping this great momentum that is the smart city. People get annoyed when you say smart cities. They would rather call them progressive cities or cities of the future. They are, for shorthand purposes, smart cities. Cities that meet the challenge of the future with the technology that is emerging to assist them. And so I'm so glad to see our panel here. Are we all up? I've asked the panelists to give you some very brief introductory remarks, and then we'll go at it with questions and answers. And I'd like to see people come up to the microphones and ask their own questions. We cannot be complete ourselves. We have to have the input of questions which adds to the vitality and the worthwhileness of a panel like this. And I have right next to me here, Rebecca Devio, welcome. We're old friends. She's with the University. She's an associate professor, is that right? Yes. Great. I would like to ask the panelists, please, to speak into the microphones and to remember that you're addressing the audience, not each other. That way the microphones pick up better. And the precious words are not lost. And then we have also from Brownsville, following on after Noel, we have Helen Ramirez, who I've met by Zoom and who I'm delighted to meet in person. And in person beats Zoom in everything and for everyone. And then on the other side here, I cannot quite see. Let me just get organized, which is novel for me. Bert Lombardos, who's the city manager of San Marcos, Texas, and Scott Sellers, city manager of Kyle, Texas, and we've introduced the panel, I believe. Did I leave anybody out? No, good. Anybody want to come and join the panel? Anybody out there who feels left out? Do feel comfortable coming up. This is a very casual performance. I'm going to ask Rebecca to start with a few remarks, her visions, her role in looking to the city of the future.
I picked the wrong seat.
Oops.
to have to start here. So my name is Rebecca Davio. I am an associate professor of practice. That means that I've spent the majority of my career outside the university, and I learned a lot of things there. And what I realized reflecting back and thinking about smart cities is that I was trying to be smart when I was in government. I just didn't have that really catchy term to go along with it, because I was trying to collaborate and build partnerships with people to make decisions based on data and to serve the people that I was honored to be able to help in the professions that I chose in state government. And so it wasn't called SMART yet, but it felt really good. It felt like we were trying to improve the service, improve our efficiency, make smarter decisions, and improve our workforce and make it a better place to be. And that portion of my career ended, and I feel very, very blessed to be at Texas State and to be able to, my jobs, I have 3 different jobs at Texas State. I'm the Geography Department Internship Coordinator, I'm an Associate Professor of Practice, and I'm the Director of the Institute for Government Innovation. And all of those positions are about creating linkages between the university and what I refer to affectionately as the real world. And it's a wonderful place to be. It's an honor to be able to do that. And I'm so excited. I'm also get to hang with Andres and Stan and work on Cedar, and to be able to unite with all of y'all in common mission of making things better is, to me, what smart cities, and I wouldn't limit it to just smart cities because I work predominantly in state government. We need to be smart all over.
Thank you. Bert.
Well, good morning, everyone. Bert Lombardos, City Manager for the City of San Marcos, the beautiful community you're in. You're here today. I've had the pleasure of being a City Manager in San Marcos now for 4 years. I've been either a City Manager or an administrator in 7 different cities for almost 40 years now. As Noel said, I did start at the ripe age of 22 and home of my alma mater. So so for me, it's in the community that I work in San Marcos, right under 70,000 residents. It's how do you take technology, how do you take smart city concepts and apply it to a community that is below the AMI or the average median income of the entire MSA. A lot of the challenges that Noel talked about is somewhat similar to San Marcos in the sense that, you know, we don't have the median income. We have the poverty rates. We have a lot of the challenges that you see in a lot of communities. And where I operate is I had the pleasure of going to Israel and Tel Aviv about 3 years ago and looking at their smart city model. If you look at the Tel Aviv-Yafo municipality, you can glean a lot of the approaches that they're taking in terms of them being the example and the model of what we should be striving for. But for me is how do I take that and apply it to a community that has a lot of different social, economic, and all sorts of other challenges. And what I'll talk about today is how I'm applying that to that community in all sorts of ways. How do we connect our citizens? How do we develop the right foundation and the infrastructure? And how do we use not only Internet of all things or even information and internet-based applications like Waze, for example, how do we apply that to our infrastructure, to our transportation systems, and how do we offer and implement different modes of transportation? And I'll talk about some of the partnerships that we have in actuality with my alma mater, which is Texas State, because I consider that to be a huge linkage in us being able to get to where we need to go. So good to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. And Scott?
Thank you. Scott Sellers, City Manager of Kyle, just up the road. I was City Manager in East Texas, and what they say there is never get in the way of an East Texan and lunch. So I'm just going to keep my comments very brief. We can move on.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It seems to me that our last speaker, of course, is Helen, but she's never lost in any real sense.
Thank you. It's great being here. I am the Deputy City Manager for the City of Brownsville, and I have another hat. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the Greater Brownsville Incentives Corporation, which is the Economic Development Type A corporation for the city. So it's fun. I lead or supervise 5 departments. It's all the development type of departments, which is planning and redevelopment, engineering, public works, multimodal transportation, communications, marketing, and CVB. and health and wellness, which I thought health and wellness was going to be the fun one until COVID hit, and then you realize, wow, that was the department that really has led much of of everything that we're doing through COVID. I formerly worked as an assistant city manager for one of the fastest cities in Texas, that's Hutto. Interesting conversation with the new assistant ACM there that has told me that they're embarking on a new comprehensive plan. So much of what we developed when I was there in 2016 has already been developed, right? And that's a 5-year horizon for normally a future land use plan is 10-year horizon. So speaking about acceleration, much of what Brownsville's doing and much of the presentation you saw was fixing some of the cracks, right, or their big cracks, while we also innovate for the future. And so much of our 1,200 employees, that's the culture part. Innovation, communication, trust, participation, those are our values. And so if you get a whole bunch of employees that lead these departments to really think in innovation or another way of thinking, that's how we're going to get there faster. I also think we're fortunate. I'm an urban planner by profession. I was the director of urban planning. I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. We had a whole design village. So you were always challenged, to learn by doing. That a big part of what was you join in with other disciplines such as landscape architecture, construction management, architecture, just combine all your professions and really come up with a new way of thinking, or a new design, or a new solution. I was taught that. It was not theoretical, and I think that's how we innovate and we practice in the city, and I think within our community. That's what it's gonna allow us to accelerate and I think be successful in a very fast-changing, exponentially fast-changing world that we live in. I also believe that we're on a sweet spot with regard to population size. So we're 200,000 population, which I think is not too large where you're so bureaucratic. You have to kind of cut through a lot of layers to decide or be agile. But you're not small enough where you don't have enough resources to really work with something or really innovate. So for me, I take pride in the size. And I think that going from a 30,000 population city to a 200,000 population, we've been able to do just so much more with our staff and with our community. I would also say that much of the acceleration is done through not alone a P3 structure. I really believe that public-private partnerships are the way to get there. I think they're also the best way to get there. And that can be with higher education, the tech college, with community industry partners such as SpaceX or Keppel Amfield, which is building the largest hybrid shipbuilding in the state of Texas right now. So the P3 structure, I think, is fundamental in able to accelerate and really take the city to a different level.
Thank you very much. I've been reporting on smart cities for several years now, and I find that cities around the globe all are seeking smartness, all are seeking a greater deployment of technology, but with the different sets of priorities. In Europe and Asia, public transportation is very high on the list, less so in America. And in that time, there have been huge things that are rather broad-sided cities. The pandemic, changing weather patterns, the collapse of shopping centers, the sudden, for me, extraordinary appearance of scooters and a new kind of public transportation that was not contemplated, that probably wasn't in anybody's S-curve, or may it have been. So I want to ask Bert, how do you deal with these new sets of factors? I also would like to commend Andres for the great remark that the traffic light is the cell phone of the city, of the smart city. I think that is so true. Bert?
So in the area of public transportation,
Well, the area of what are these new forces on cities, even as we're talking about the greater deployment of just digitization. There are new forces, some of which are physical and not technological.
sure. Um, So for us, in a variety of different areas, when we look at, for example, smart technology that applies to traffic controls and road closures, we rely a lot on the Internet of Things. So that's a heavy reliance, whether it's traffic signals or traffic cameras, the standardization. But one of the things that we found also is by, like, for example, using internet-based ways, it also, the crowdsourcing aspect of it, it's something that provides real-time data, and it's information that we can readily use. And so that application becomes very critical because it helps us with our decision-making on real-time and very specific, whether it's traffic flows, accidents or backups. One thing that is very prevalent in San Marcos is that we have a high number of crashes that we have to deal with that requires a lot of resources. And so anything that we can use in terms of real data as it relates to transportation or even my public safety staff is important because we have a long stretch of 35 that plays a huge factor. So whether it's that and how it applies to communities that have challenging demographics, it becomes a little bit more difficult because you don't have the capital and you don't have the funding. But what I have found, and I agree with Ms. Ramirez, that the partnerships aspect of it is extremely huge. So if we can bring in either the private sector or in our case where we're looking at the university to do public-private partnerships with everything that they bring is hugely important. And I have example after example where we do that continuously. And one of those is on what I'm very proud of that I've spent almost my 4 years on has been a seamless public transportation system. And that is, how do we take the Bobcat shuttle that is transporting students every day, and then how do we take our public transit system and combine that into one reliable, seamless system that also takes advantage of technology. So to me, that's one example of what we're looking at.
Very interesting, thank you. I wonder, Scott Sellers, how you prioritize the different aspects of the smart city. What do you put in place first? Is it the traffic lights? And what about the old bugaboos of cities like wastewater and solid waste?
Thank you. It's a great question. How do you prioritize a smart city? I don't know if you do. Basically, there are so many different ways to implement smart city, and I think, cities get in the habit
Do we have a problem? Maybe somebody
there we go.
else's.
I'm just going to use Bert's microphone.
That's called a detour.
Right
Take
there.
another road.
So we prioritize based on opportunities and funding.
Desperation.
So I think sometimes we get in the habit of chasing tech just to chase it, and sometimes it doesn't make sense for us. So we look at it very holistically. What does our community need? We all have unique desires. We have unique constraints, funding challenges as well. I've just heard from several cities that have low AMI, and City of Kyle, for example, we do not. So we're in a census tract that does not qualify for federal subsidies for smart city initiatives. So we've got to be very creative. And then, looking at the growth trajectory and where you are as a community, whether that's smart meters, smart traffic lights, automated vehicles, et cetera, we just kind of take it as you go. Just to kind of piggyback on what Bert was saying, many cities have looked at fixed route transit systems, and we had done the very same thing. We actually had previously gone through a demand-based public transit system that was just costing a lot of money for the ridership. We were probably seeing, 7 to 12 riders, unique riders per month on this system. So definitely not justifying a city demand-based transit system. So we looked at technology, and the current ride-sharing programs seem to be a great fit for us. So our public transportation system involves us subsidizing Uber rides throughout the city. So we have a Kyle Uber 314 program. It is our public transit system, and anyone in the city pays $3.14 for any ride point to point around the Kyle area. To me, that's just a way of prioritizing, to answer your question, finding technology and implementing smart cities where it makes sense for our community.
Rebecca, what do you see as the generic issues bearing down on cities? The rest of our panel will speak for specific cities. You have a broader view of them. What are the generic issues bearing down, and how are they changing because of great events, such as hurricanes or the pandemic?
Another great challenging question. Thank you, Andres, for giving us a very, very professional interviewer. So I think that some of the issues that are facing cities are not necessarily unique. You know, it's like we've always wanted good service from our cities and our governments, you know, and now there's more of an ability to see that, to understand that in real time. And so that's something, I mean, certainly there's the pressure to do more, but that's also not a new pressure, do more with less kind of thing. Now there's just so much more technology and broadband and all these needs that have been talked about already that come up. And then, you know, there's just the list, as I'm certain our city managers can tell us, feels endless and overwhelming. And I think one thing that comes is a need for a culture shift in the decision makers.
And how would that be? How would you shift the culture from what is the negative culture or the inappropriate culture of today to the more positive, dynamic culture of the future?
Well, I think government represents opportunities. It's opportunities to serve, it's opportunities to do things differently, to be innovative, to make the lives of residents better. And, you know, when I first started out in government, the old joke was good enough for government work. And that made me so mad, because it's like, that's not what I'm trying to do. I want to make it better for everybody. And I think now there are more people that are realizing that and seeing the potential. And it's partnerships like this that bring together universities with city managers, with the private sector, to create these wonderful problem-solving partnerships.
Thank you. Helen, Noel referred to maybe leapfrogging public transportation, going to new systems of public transportation and not having to go to railroads as a consequence. I'm interested in leapfrogging. We've seen how in Africa, for example, cell phones have leapfrogged copper wire phones, and they may never exist there. We're seeing leapfrogging in different ways. What are you doing that looks like leapfrogging in Brownsville, which basically has this huge opportunity for the future because of technological companies moving in?
Thank you for that. Well, there's a couple of things that the way we, I think, approaching these different types of modes of transportation, Noel mentioned 5 modes of space being one of them with regard to air or airport, but also vertical takeoff and landing. If you go to Rio, many of the CEOs and business people travel on helicopters, and they take their meetings from one skyscraper to another skyscraper, and they travel on a helicopter. So this type of new aircraft is similar concept to that, with the exception that rather than maybe staying within a central business district, you could actually, will eventually be able to travel, and the technology is being researched and tested, and we will be part of that, the city of Brownsville will, and to be able to travel 500 miles, you know, from Brownsville to Austin or to Houston or to Dallas. So, and also look at cargo. It's, you know, you're gonna hear Dwight talking about crawl, walk, and run, right? We need to test these things, make sure that our community feels safe doing that. We're also a city that has the largest transit ridership in the Rio Grande Valley. There's 1 million riders a year, believe it or not. So for us, with our new mobility plan that we're actually going to be awarding soon, the challenge for us has been, how do these all interconnect? We talk about seamless connectivity and travel connectivity between all modes. I remember being at a conference and talking to someone saying, if I left my door at, in the city of Los Angeles, how do I travel? And, from door to door, from LA to Brownsville, how do I get there? Is there a way that with one app I could actually plan my whole trip, whether transportation, airline, VTOL, reservation in a hotel, just seamless through one app. And so that's kind of where we're headed to, the IoT and the connectivity between these different modes of transportation to make it more efficient. When we prioritize smart city projects, we look at the return on investment of that. And we talk with our directors on what's the ROI? What are those real numbers behind that decision making? And then 2, what is the pain point that we're experiencing? Many times when I talk to a company, I say, what are the 2 biggest challenges that you're facing, and how can we as an EDO help you through that? Well, it should be the same for our companies and our cities, and our employees. What are the pain points that we are challenged with, and how do I use technology or a new way of thinking or process to get there quicker? And so the ROI of that decision making, and not taking on too many, because we all have a laundry list of we would love to do this, but what are those real pain points, and what ROI will be improved with that?
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question of the whole panel, but we can go through it name by name. What about electricity? The city of the future relies on electricity more so even than cities today. And resilience in the electric industry is talked about, but as we see in many places, it's not there yet. Wildfires in the west, a hurricane on the east coast, which mercifully was not so damaging, and the total catastrophe in the Gulf Coast with the city of New Orleans without any power and no possibility that it will get power for quite a long time. If you're going to build a city that is entirely dependent on electricity, should you build in safeguards? Now, I'd like to say that I noticed that on the program, Shad Mansour from EPRI is speaking later today, and he is a very thoughtful and worthwhile speaker. And somebody else who plays a role in securing the resilience of utilities, Rob Schwartz from Anterix is going to explain how better communications can be a defensive mechanism for utilities. But still, there is that issue. Are they up to it? Do the cities need to put in their own storage? And are the cities confident of the supply of electricity as they add more and more demands, more and more things that depend, including the electric aerial taxis? Where is the electricity going to come from? And how reliable is the supply going to be in a time of terribly aberrant weather? Let's start with maybe Bert.
Well, if you would have asked me that question back in February during the winter storm, I would have said no, we're not prepared. Because obviously that is a prime example of what happens when we, as a state, is not prepared. And that it has initiated a lot of mitigation and weatherization, hardening of our systems, and that's exactly what we're doing in our community. We're spending capital improvement dollars to do that. In addition to that, one of the other strategies that we've already been implementing now for the last couple of years, because we do have our own electric system as well, is underground utilities, underground lines in a lot of critical areas. Now, that is a very expensive proposition. It costs millions of dollars, so it's not an easy task, but we do have a plan that it will get us there in the future. So that is extremely, extremely critical. But I think overall what we learned is not only for the electrical system, but if you think about it, electric affects your water system and your wastewater system. We had areas where in the city we were even struggling to get sufficient water pressure just to our hospitals or many of our critical infrastructure areas. So needless to say, it's an all-out approach to look at not only electrical but water and wastewater distribution, and essentially make sure that our total infrastructure is protected and planned for in a much more different way. I mentioned earlier that I've been doing this in city management now for about 40 years, and never have I seen an event like we went through in February. This is just totally off the charts and unprecedented. I've gone through hurricanes, I've gone through winter storms with major power outages. I worked in Austin for about 11 years and saw about any and all type of emergency and weather events that you could possibly see. So I think if anything, this is now going to be part of our guidebook and our planning in our emergency management. But I think for us, it's really more about how do you weatherize, how do you mitigate and plan for, and then also do a lot of underground utilities, because I think that'll be the protection that will at least make it a little bit more feasible in the future.
Scott, would you like to tell us, and I'd also like to point out to the audience, there are microphones, go to them and ask questions. We will try and answer them. Scott?
Sure. So I think just in general, we rely on old technology. It's very stable, but coal-fired plants are not only harming the environment, but it's what we rely on the most when there are other technologies that we need to continue to develop. And we all know what they are. Photovoltaic makes a lot of sense. I don't know how many of you are reading on the latest research on fusion power technology, which is amazing. Battery storage. So, we look to the private sector to help innovate and work with them. So it's all about continuing to rely and push the envelope when it comes to technology, bring the cost down because it is very expensive. But I think in the future, we're going to be relying more and more on these new technologies.
Rebecca, is this a concern in government circles? Is it discussed, ways of hardening the electric utilities, whether or not they are enthusiastic?
Well, my question would be, is it enough concern? And, I also don't think we can put it all on government. I think some of that we have to take personal responsibility. We're getting lots and lots of signs of this is a major vulnerability, and we really have to focus on it, and it might not get all the headlines and things like that to do that basic work that's required, but I think it's very important.
Helen?
I think, Brownsville just signed the agreement with AYPA Energy to do battery storage and also photovoltaic at our airport, Air and Space Campus. We've also talked to Dwight and SNE Energy about microgrids. We're introducing the concept also, not without requiring it, because I think government, where we go wrong is that we say, you must do this, you must do that. It's like this command and control. Well, why don't we incentivize? Why don't we make it easy for them to go through the permitting process? So there's other ways where we can incentivize developers to want to include that in their project, right? And to help them make it easy and streamlined through our building codes and planning codes to be able to incentivize that. I mean, in February, I think we gave the state of Texas gave many states work in construction, right? I mean, how many? My adjuster, my first floor flooded. I have a home here, and we're barely getting our kitchen installed this month. And that's since February. So this is serious stuff. I think our community now expects bold steps and absolute leadership on the local level, not only the state level, it's the local level, and by the development community. So going back to those public-private partnerships, where are our developers and how are they developing new master plan communities? Are they looking at microgrids? Are they looking at other types of wind generation or photovoltaic generation in how they plan their communities? This should not be on the shoulders of government. we should facilitate it, but absolutely that where the public sector really needs to, the private sector really needs to step it up, with that. And so we have our energy utility company, and we're also saying we really need to look at these other types of methods of energy consumption in our city and have redundancy in the system. And so that's where we're headed. We've changed our building codes and planning codes to make it easier to develop that way. But I think a lot of it's education as well. Educate our public, educate our community, and our developers.
Thank you. We'll take the question from the floor.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Just go ahead.
So, you can't hear. Okay.
Tip the whole thing down towards yourself like a rock musician.
Will do. Okay, here you go. That's much better. Right. One of the things that fueled the Massachusetts miracle was the fact that there was excellent public education in Massachusetts, primary and secondary education. This is a very competitive environment right now, attracting companies to states and attracting smart workers to states. So I'd like to know what your investments are in primary and secondary education. And Rebecca, I want you to weigh in on that, being somebody that's worked a lot with government. So our city managers and Rebecca, thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca, do you wish to weigh in? We have certainly seen that where there's been good education, you've seen an agglomeration of high-tech companies chasing or at least being highly influenced by the availability of qualified people.
Mm-hmm. Education just seems so fundamental and foundational to me that so many of our problems, our societal problems and our issues can be changed through education. And, it starts certainly at the elementary school level and goes all the way through college, but it's also just educating and explaining basic principles that we take for granted. We're working on projects now about recycling and how to get more people. And it's like, everybody said the number one thing is education. People don't understand, and yet recycling's been around for a long time, and that seems like such a simple concept, but it really takes that patient explanation and thoughtful sharing of information.
Anybody like to add to that?
I think as an economic development organization, I think most EDOs in the state and the nation really work hand in hand with our ISDs, our different schools, to ensure, to support really STEM learning or other types of technology and innovation learning. Upskilling our labor is also important, not only for primary and secondary, but also the parents, right? The parents that support their children's electives or support them trying a new skill. We're introducing droned courses at the educational level, at the elementary and high school level. It's introducing those new programs, and now we see, SpaceX is giving tours to they started with our high schools, and then they toured our middle schools, and now going to elementary schools. And so, wow, that field trip can be life-changing for that child. And so, I think what's unique about their approach is that I remember I was a senior planner in the city of Hawthorne, California. Northrop Grumman was there. We never knew what Northrop Grumman did. It was this big building on our airport, and you never could check the inspections. You never knew what they were up to, right? And you didn't really ask, okay? And then to see SpaceX is out there. It's out. You drive Highway 4, and you see the Starship. You see the former testing SN-15, SN-16. You see the hopper that just hopped barely 200 meters. So you're kind of in their test bed. How innovative is that for a child, for anybody at any age that goes there? So for me, the way they share their innovation is very different from the past. And that's why commercial space is just so, just inspirational.
Thank you. From the floor, the man who looks like Darth Vader.
I have a quick question for you all. Really, a two-part question maybe. Just want to get you. So, City of Brownsville, City of Kyle, City of San Marcos are CEDAR members. And I would love to hear real quick, going back to transportation and housing, I would like for Scott to talk to us about how he solved the mass transit problem in Kyle with a key partnership, if you can talk about that. And then I would like to hear from Bert about his vision of coming to us and working with us on solving affordable housing, workforce housing of the future on a project that we have.
Thank you.
All right, so I think the question is a little loaded so that we can just knock one out of the park for Cedar. So let me just start out by doing that for you, Andres. Really, it kind of goes back to the last question as well. What do we need from an educational standpoint? We need a champion. That's probably the biggest thing. We're here in the innovation corridor, but with three major universities, community colleges all around, but there hasn't been a group putting everyone together with the public and private sector. And that's what Cedar is doing. So my hat's off to you, Andres, and Texas State and what you're trying to do. It's really convening forums like these that I think are going to take us to the next level from an educational, governmental, private sector standpoint. The question about transportation, I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but the issue we had in Kyle was how do you solve mass transit from a cost standpoint, from a ridership standpoint, where I think most communities, maybe not Brownsville, but I look around and most large buses sit maybe 10% full, and so we didn't want to continue subsidizing that. We had the same issue in Kyle. We looked to rideshare companies. We looked to the private sector, and originally had worked with Lyft. They did not have the ability to offer what's called a WAVE ride, or wheelchair accessible vehicle ride, and the federal government demanded that for any sort of demand-based system or fixed route system. Fortunately for us, Uber does have WAV WAVE vehicles, and so we were able to work with them on a voucher program. So if you get on the City of Kyle app, which is just through any Play Store, and then download that, you can just put in your city credentials, your address, and then download a Uber 314 voucher for X number of rides per month, and then the city will subsidize that. And at the end of the day, we have way more 10 times more ridership because it's a lot more convenient, and we're paying about 1/10 the cost of the former program. So it's just been an absolute success. And we're going into, I believe, our second full year with them right now.
Very interesting. Anybody else want to answer Andre's question?
So I can address the workforce housing issue. By way of context, the city's demographics are like 72% renters and 28% homeowners. Secondly, most of all of our housing development is occurring on the outer limits of our community, not in what I would say in our neighborhoods and in the infill areas. The other one, which is a pretty stark piece of information, is that half of our families could only afford no more than about $150,000 home. However, the market is producing homes on average at the low end about $250,000, all the way up to about $1 million. So you can see where the problem lies. And the problem lies in, we have a lot of people, and we're at it, and I know Jason Giglietti from GSMP is going to talk about the innovation corridor later on, which is huge for our area. However, it has produced a high percentage of more employees. We also have another demographic where we have a lot of people that are actually driving into San Marcos versus actually living here. So workforce housing is a huge priority for us, because for folks that are just simply working as a teacher, or maybe a couple of teachers, they can't afford what the market is producing. So we're working on I think a very innovative approach. This was a topic that I worked in Austin, and we couldn't really crack that nut. But what we did do here is we partnered with Cedars and the private sector, and trying to come up with a competition around how do you actually build a home that is truly affordable for the people that need it the most, and take advantage of the great skill set that the university brings in maintaining the data, looking at all the nuances of what goes into the building and how to maintain it, and what are the ways of how you can make it much more efficient, and really use the research and development aspect of it that Texas State is known for, and really come up with a product that can meet the needs of many of our residents. So I'm excited about this because I think it's going to have a profound effect in our community. And quite frankly, almost every city that I've been at, workforce housing or affordable housing is a key issue. This is something that, in effect, could almost be replicated. And as a matter of fact, we haven't talked about copyright rights, so we might want to do that, and maybe we can make a little bit of money. But whatever the case, that's the initiative that Andres was talking about.
I think that's very interesting. Thank you. Gentleman at the microphone.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Van. I'm the VP of Innovation at Lemonade, a founding member of CEDAR. Thank you all for having us and sharing your knowledge. One thing that's come up several times has been the lack of broadband connectivity. Lemonade itself is an ISP, and we think of ourselves more like an internet experience provider, and more than anything, we want to unlock some of those issues that y'all have as you roll out new IoT applications, smart city applications. But more than anything, what does a good or great public-private partnership look like? Whether that's for master plan communities, an ISP, last mile partnership, or anything like that. Like that Uber case study sounded amazing. And so I'm just curious, what are the unique challenges you find, whether that's for electricity, redundant power, or connectivity? What have been the gatekeeping? What's the gatekeepers that keep those things from moving faster?
For us, the ARP, American Recovery Funds, have accelerated that. So we've already dedicated $20 million towards the middle mile. I think that the last mile is a very important part of everything, and we realize that. We understand that if it's too pricey, then we would have failed. So I think understanding that, and we've also learned from other communities. So one is, what are the case studies out there? How do we write the right scope of work, RFI, RFP? And also, should we be providing a gig and then maybe just more of a basic, level where maybe that's more affordable for our whole community? So you're kind of looking at, the needs of different socioeconomic backgrounds, right? And so those are the things that we're taking into considerations as we move forward with our broadband plan.
Thank you. Gentleman at the microphone.
Hello, I'm Kumudan Grub, and I am a student as well as I'm working full-time. And so I love driving on I-35, commuting back and forth. Not really. So my question, since there's city managers, we don't have the representation from Austin or Dallas. What's stopping us from having a Shinkansen, which is a long-distance transport system in Japan, like the bullet train, where they've had it for over half a century now and not a single fatality, injury, train-related accident. Very efficient, and I've never been there, but I was watching 4K YouTube videos on the train transport. It's just, why can't we have that? It's a very advanced system. I know we want to leapfrog here, but I think this is a system that's in place and tried and tested, which at least for Central Texas would make a lot of sense. What's stopping us? Are we talking about that, or is that not in the works at all?
Thank you. Anybody on the panel like to grab that?
I'll take a first
Go
stab.
ahead, please.
Thank you. The last couple of questions were very good, and the short answer to both is money. There's always a question about they. When will they fix it? When will they plan? When will they do this and that? Who is the they? And I kind of do this because a lot of people think it's the government, and I'm kind of pointing right back at the private sector saying, we're very willing. So when it comes to not only broadband, but transportation, you've got willing participants. I know city managers across the state of Texas and beyond. We're all very innovative. We all want to see our cities grow with smart cities. How do we fund it, and who are going to be our private sector partners to help us get there? So with broadband, I love what Brownsville is doing, and we're kind of doing the same, using our trail network as middle mile. I would love a private sector company to come in and say, how do we become the last mile? And then going back to full circle to earlier questions about innovation and technology, well, maybe it's Starlink, and maybe it's 5G with some of our cellular providers. Maybe it's a true fiber optics, fiber to the home provider. I'm looking for that partner to come in and say, hey, let's collectively solve a problem for our citizens, which is maybe rural broadband or just increased connectivity. From a transportation standpoint, same thing. We have worked and worked and worked, and some of you may not remember, there were a lot of initiatives discussed, vetted, but yet unfunded from the past to bring high-speed rail to the Austin corridor. Union Pacific was a partner at the time, is no longer a partner in that, so now we have to find new right-of-way. We've got new tech like the Boring Company coming in and saying, hey, can we go subterranean? I think that's a great idea. Maybe there's drone technology. At the end of the day, if we can make it work, we can fit it into the plan somehow, we're all open ears. We want to make it happen. Where do we go to find the partners? Where do we go to find the funding? And let's all get there together.
I'm going to take a...
Thank you.
I want to take it really quickly also. I think some of the countries such as Spain and France who have done it right and have high-speed rail is because many of the presidents or the government officials really felt this is where top-down government probably works the best because they allocate funding for it. Cities can barely fund bus transit systems and much less a high-speed rail corridor. So this is where our federal government really needs to step it up if you really want high-speed rail. We also have environmental regulatory challenges with some new right-of-way acquisition that's happened in Northern California and Southern California, where I'm not saying that Environmental Quality Act is not important, but what I'm saying is that sometimes it just bogs down a whole system, and so the end mission is never reached, and it's bogged down in legal battles. So, when the funding, you can have a P3 structure with those. I think many cities do internationally. So also having that, being open to that structure. But ultimately, the funding needs to be there on a federal level to really get it done, or else it's very hard to get it off the ground.
Thank you. Anybody got anything else to say?
Please. So one comment on the transportation. I couldn't agree with you more, because when I travel to cities like Amsterdam, or I've gone to Boston, or I've gone to a lot of different cities, I mean, that's just part of what you do, right? And I love it. However, I think beyond all of the issues that we talked about, I would want to amplify one thing that Ms. Ramirez talked about, is the way the federal program funding structure is set up. It's incentivizes cities to do the public transit systems. They don't incentivize cities to look at things outside of that. So that's the first challenge. So if you don't have a major source of revenue, then that's a problem. And then the second problem is the competition. When you have UPRR, that is your rail service, that makes a ton of money out of freight and cargo, why would they then turn around and work with you on the right-of-way? So you've got two huge challenges there, and so cities are left with having to look at public transit systems, what we can do within our city limits. But I agree with Mr. Sellers that if there is a partner with doing something differently, that would be great, but you've got to look at the system as a whole, because like with us, I mean, I can look at the city limits, but then we also have a lot of students that are coming in from Austin into San Marcos to Texas State, and you got to look at that aspect as well. So it's a very complex issue, but I think we've got a lot of challenges that prevents people from getting a little bit creative.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask the panel, we're just about out of time, to think up something very quick to say in a lightning round. And I would like to mention that I have this feeling that cities are about to take a great leap forward in the way that they did in the 19th century, when they put in sewage, when they put in transportation, when need, innovation, and technology came together and everything was changed in New York, in London, everywhere. The larger the city it tended to be, the quicker and the more dramatic the fix had to be. London had no sewage to speak of except a river which was known as the Big Stink. A lot of civil engineering, a lot of innovation, a lot of money, and today's London was basically created when they fixed that. I'd like to mention something else. We heard microgrids. They are a very useful tool in stabilizing electric supply. And over in San Antonio, the utility there is doing, CPS Energy is doing something very interesting. Normally, microgrids are expected to be community, local. They're looking to their biggest customers with the idea of putting their biggest customers into microgrids because that would speed things up. I think it's a very interesting approach. Now, to conclude our lightning round, let's start with Bert.
So I totally agree with you that cities and city managers, even old-timies like myself that have been around for a long time, we've seen the evolution of technology and innovation from, I never would imagine seeing little robots working in our park systems, picking up trash, or the smart meter technology, the drone technology. We talked about the traffic control systems and the road closures, the Internet of all things and Waze and all of those type of things. The other thing is that we're seeing it in economic development in companies. We've had a couple of very leading and cutting edge companies that have come in where they're essentially doing, we just had an announcement with Cooperative Laundry, which is using robotics to actually clean, press, and fold, and even load laundry for hotels in trucks. So, I mean, who would have ever imagined, right? So I think cities are very much poised based on your comments, so I would agree.
Scott?
There's always a concern when you push so forward with smart cities, and the concern is privacy and data. And, recently we had a huge breach from T-Mobile. I call that the big stink instead of the big sink, because I had just moved to T-Mobile the week prior. So anyway, control of data, control of systems, getting enough people who understand systems, and then really the big sink in smart cities is just the cost. And I can't overemphasize that. We're all doing the best we can with what we have, and we want to innovate. We want to move everything forward, but these things cost a lot of money. So without I would say more of a concerted effort from the federal government, not that I ever want to rely on them. We're going to have to just rely on each other. Look around here in this room. So we get together, we find a plan, and then try to work the plan. So, thank you.
Thank you, Helen.
Well, with regard to mobility, I'm looking forward to being part of a city that transforms transportation through a highway of the sky, whether it's vertiports and another way of thinking. And working through the FAA regulation that hasn't really written the regulations on that. So for us, it's being a community that really participates in that, whether you call it disruption, then create a better solution. So that's what we're headed towards and we're excited about.
And finally, Rebecca.
Well, I think data and technology is so key to what we're doing and innovation, but I also think that leadership and collaboration are key. It's coming together in sort of a selfless fashion and saying, how can we make this better? How can we make improvements? And we've all started and taken that step, and Cedar is just an amazing thing that Texas State is doing. And we aren't doing it alone. It's our partners and our members, that it makes all the difference. And really, the leadership and the collaboration is foundationed on technology and data.
Thank you. You had the last word, Rebecca, except I have the last word. And that is, I'd like to, when we think of great innovation and things going forward and IoT, etc., to remind people that in 1969, we got a man to the moon. But in 1970, we put wheels on luggage and changed the world. thank this wonderful panel, so frank and so engaging. Cheers.